It depends on what we do. I think the current approach is not going to work because it's expensive to run a big relay. And so it either has to be monetized like Nostr.land does, which is great. I think that's a solid thing to do. It aligns incentives. Or people are going to be donating a lot of money to run big relays, or they're going to shut down their relays. And I don't think Damus is going to shut down. I think having a relay is a really like strategic asset for them. I personally don't think clients should run relays. I don't run a relay. And I've heard other people say the same thing because clients and relays coupling sort of creates it just gives you more control and more responsibility over the network. But so there's a bunch of things that we can do to prevent this sort of centralization of relays. I don't know how often people use Blaster anymore, but not doing that.
What's your new podcast all about?
It's called Thank God for Nostr. I don't know if you've heard of Thank God for Bitcoin, but
okay, I think I've heard it. I don't know that I've heard the podcast, but I think I've seen heard of it.
Yeah, they just launched a podcast, and I think they've done well. They did a conference in Miami like the couple days before the Bitcoin conference, and then I'm not sure if that was their first one or the second. I think it was the second one. So I happened to meet the guy who runs it, Jordan, in Miami when I was there. And I was like, I like your brand. I would like the same kind of thing for Nostr. So let's go ahead and do it. And he totally went for it. He was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. Let's do it. So now we're recording a couple episodes a week. And the first one should be out this week. We've at least got a teaser out there already. But yeah, we're kind of...
check it. Can I just find it? Like, do you have a website for it, or just find it linked to your...
I think tgfb.com, and then there's like the podcast button at the top, and it's listed there.
Oh, nice. Yep, I see it right here.
Yeah.
And so it's
super exciting.
So the goal of TGFB is to educate and equip Christians to understand Bitcoin and use it for the glory of God. And then this is kind of the same thing, but for Nostr. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. We're kind of getting started with like a 5 or 6 part series on what is Nostr, why should normal people care about it, and then we kind of like go off the rails into like some Christian philosophy stuff, and then bring it back to Nostr and back and forth. And then when we have that out, we're going to start just talking about sort of, I guess you might call them like social issues that are tangential to Nostr. And we're going to have like guests on and stuff like that. So it should be fun. I'm not the best podcaster, but I'm glad that someone's doing it, and I get to be that person.
No,
so yeah,
you're great. Yeah, it's great to. I mean, I think it's most important thing is you have like depth and expertise in this category, which is like the most important thing. And then your podcasting skills are already great, but you can keep developing it. But most important is this new content, and you're in the thick of it. So everybody wants to hear what you're learning and knowing and figuring out.
Yeah, the thing I really have to work on is all my ums.
Oh,
all my ums and ahs.
You can actually get. Have you played with Descript? Do you know Descript?
Descript. Does that like strip the ums and ahs out for you?
One of the things, yeah, it's kind of a whole kind of video editing, podcast editing suite that lets you edit as almost like you're editing a text document, and it edits the video sort of as a side effect of your text edits.
Oh, that's really cool.
So it's a really simplified editor if you're not familiar with, Adobe Premiere Pro or some of the more professional tools.
Nice.
But they also have an and ah remover, which I've played with before, and it's actually quite good. Really well done. So
yeah, I'm ironically, I'm a Luddite. I really like doing things the hard way. So yeah. I'm doing my best to train my speech so that I'll be a good speaker. Like in college, I read Quintilian, and he has all these funny heuristics for how to deal with those exact same kind of problems. And I don't remember anything hardly from Quintilian and Cicero when we read it, but the one thing I do remember is he has all these like specific hand gestures you're supposed to use when you're speaking. So he's like, touch your thumb and your middle finger and then strike your thigh when you're making a point. And that's correct classical way to speak things. So I probably
Oh, wow.
won't be adopting that particular mannerism, but at least
I've never seen that on a podcast, but
yeah,
that'd be fun.
would be awesome. Yeah, another good like classical tip is Demosthenes was a Greek orator, and what he would do is he would go to the ocean and yell at the ocean because he had a naturally very weak voice, and so he overcame that by like speaking, orating to the ocean, which is amazing.
Right. It's good.
Dedication
Any
to
way
the
you can
craft.
get a bunch of reps, I think, is the
Yeah.
thing. Just do stuff, and it'll. Did you ever read that? I think it was. Do you know Ira Glass? I think it was an
Yeah,
Ira Glass quote. Have you read his quote on creativity?
I don't think so.
Okay, I'm gonna see if I can pull it up because it's just really good and it applies to everything. It applies to, I don't know if you can remember back when you started, building software, but it applies to that just as well as it applies to podcasting. He says, "Nobody tells this to people who are beginners. I wish someone told me. All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste, but there's this gap. For the first couple years, you make stuff." Sorry, I just got to pop up. For the first couple years, you make stuff. It's just not that good. It's trying to be good. It has potential, but it's not. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, is still killer. And your taste is why your work disappoints you. A lot of people never get past this phase. They quit. Most people I know who do interesting creative work went through years of this. We know our work doesn't have the special thing that we want it to have. We all go through this. And if you're just starting out or you're still in that phase, you got to know it's normal. And the most important thing you can do is a lot of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week you will finish one story. It is only by going through a volume of work that you will close the gap and your work will be as good as your ambitions. And I took longer to figure out how to do this than anyone I've ever met. It's going to take a while. It's normal to take a while. You've just got to fight your way through.
Yeah, that's very good.
Ira
I've
Glass.
definitely had that experience. Back in high school, I used to do a lot of animation stuff, but I didn't have any idea what you were supposed to do, and I never read a book on it or took a tutorial. I just taught myself using the tools at hand. My first few animations were made in MS Paint, and I saved them as bitmaps, and then got like a GIF stitcher thing to stitch them together, and that was how I started animating. And I did that for like 4 or 5 years, and then gave up because it was not very good. But yeah, I improved a lot over that time. What I wish people had told me is read a book. There's other people who know how to do this, and there are better tools. Don't just go at it with like a blank canvas.
Right, yeah. And today we've got YouTube, right? So YouTube's a great resource to see some of the best experts at something performing well, or hear how they talk about their journey or sort of what it was like to begin.
Yeah, the barrier to entry back then was a lot higher, for sure.
Yeah, when we didn't have all the the internet resources. I also think that something that is maybe underappreciated in this creative work process is the fact that like it feels awkward to not have your own voice or not know kind of who you are as a creative. And so it feels awkward to start by kind of copying, but actually I think it's kind of helpful to say like, hey, I see this thing that I appreciate. Can I even just make that thing, like a copy of that, but in my own creative, with my own hands in a sense. And I think if you can do that, it's like at least a kickstart to try something, and maybe you'll develop your voice over time.
That is the hard part for a really creative person, because the creative person is motivated by wanting to be authentic and original. And you can't be authentic and original if you don't rip someone off first. And usually you have to do a lot more ripping off than actual creative original work. I think, like for me at least, it's hard to realize how long life is. You see like biographies of Picasso, and he's usually, he did all his work when he was at least 60, I think. I've got another 30 years potentially before I actually do original, authentic, creative work. And that's about how long I've lived. It's hard to appreciate how much time you actually have to lay the groundwork before you do something original.
And then also take Picasso, for example. Look at some of the early stuff he did before he was the Picasso that we know. Before he developed the style that we know classically as Picasso now, he was kind of doing like the stuff that was on trend of the day. He wasn't doing like particularly novel, innovative work. He was just kind of like, in a sense, playing in the mainstream before he sort of developed his own voice.
Yeah, and ironically, I'm a very big fan of early Picasso, and I don't care that much for his later stuff. But that's neither here nor there.
Right. And so tell me a little bit more about the impetus for the podcast. So it sounds like, I know I've seen in your biography or your bio on your profile that you mentioned being a Christian, and I know we've talked about that before. How do you think that Christianity and Nostr mix, or sort of what are the potential kind of touch points where those would intersect?
Yeah, it's a funny question. I mean, as far as like why I ended up doing it, it wasn't really something I intended to do. I thought about starting a Nostr podcast back in like February, and then G Sovereignty started his, and that saved me from having to execute on it. But I like listening to podcasts, so producing one sounds like fun. And I think the reason I really started it is over the last year or two or three, I've been learning to say yes to things. Especially through this Nostr experience. I just said yes to a bunch of things that I wasn't prepared to actually execute on, and it's all turned out really well. So I was like, well, let's just say yes to this too. You have to say no to a lot of other things, but it was just kind of an accident, really, that we started it. But yeah, your question about what Christianity has to do with Nostr is really interesting, because, you know, as a Christian, well, it's like any other worldview, really. Your worldview shapes basically everything. And as a Christian, you know, we believe that God made the world and he called it good at the beginning. And so anything that's in the world is good in some essential sense. That doesn't mean that evil doesn't exist, but it does mean that knowing the creator God means that you have a special kind of insight into basically everything. And that's not to say that everything that exists is in the Bible. Obviously not. Like there's very little in the Bible about metallurgy, right? You have to actually like do the hard work of researching and discovering information about the world through science in order to do something new, or, you know, like artistic, authentic. But knowing the creator God who made things, there's a proverb we actually cited on the podcast recently. It's the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it's the glory of kings to find out a matter. So that's kind of an oblique answer, but yeah, it's like being a Christian shapes how you think about everything, and especially when you're talking about social media. So it's hard to see how being a Christian might affect your job in material science or something like that, coming up with better like adhesives or whatever. But when you're talking about social media, it's really important to have a framework for what speech is, what people are for, what society is for, how society should actually function. There's so much cultural impetus right now of escaping the constraints that are put on people. And I think to the point where a lot of people don't believe there are any real constraints. You know, you see this in the politics that we have today, but also in a lot of the approach to technology. You know, Elon Musk is an obvious example. He wants to do Neuralink and, separate our mind from our soul and from our body, because he doesn't really believe in the soul. And that's a project that, from a materialistic perspective, looks like it would work. Same thing with AI. If AI takes over and we do a good job of harnessing it, then basically any result is okay. We balk against the idea of serving our robot overlord masters who extinguish the human race, but materialists don't really have a reason to object to that, because if we're just material, if we are just brains, then our minds can be uploaded to the cloud and we don't lose anything. But as a Christian, I believe that people are created in the image of God. There's something triune about us. There's something really essential about our bodies, as awkward and like ugly as like the physical reality of people is. That is something that God called good, and so we should not discard those things without reason. And, you know, my personal like prediction about AI and transhumanism and a lot of the futurism stuff is it's not even going to result in a dystopia. It's just going to fall apart. There's a lot of stuff in the Bible juxtaposing the kingdom of God with the kingdom of man. St. Augustine wrote a book on that. But, Babylon versus Jerusalem. Jerusalem is supposed to be the heavenly city where there's justice. And, in reality, that was not really true. Jerusalem usually acted more like Babylon. But then the Babylonians actually come in and capture the Jews and bring them off to Babylon. And then you really see what Babylon is like. And, Babylon is one of the most ancient cultures in existence. And, they were all about control, about law. Hammurabi introduced the law. They had a base 60 number system. So they had math and they had commerce. They locked down a lot of stuff. Their mythology is very well developed. Their society was very stable. They locked down a whole lot of stuff. But that's not really how God intended the world to be run. When the Babylonians way early on built the Tower of Babel, he came down and he said, you know what, you guys, you're not exactly doing this according to plan. I'm gonna reorient you, and you're not gonna like it, but I'm gonna send you off in some different directions to do things my way. And God has intervened in history a lot less frequently since then. We're reading about. I'm reading Jeremiah with my family right now, and in that story, God takes out Jerusalem by sending Babylon to do it. He's like, Babylon is the work of my hands. They're doing my work, so just go along peacefully because I'll take care of you. This is my plan. Whereas, 1,000 years before that, 800 years before, Sodom and Gomorrah needed some judgment, and he was just like, all right, I'm going to send some angels and they're going to rain some fire and brimstone from the heaven, and it's going to get flattened. So God's heavy-handed involvement has decreased over time because he's giving people the job that they originally were meant to be given. In the Garden of Eden, he said, Adam, go name all the animals. That's your job. And Adam didn't last long before he got fired. But the creation mandate of fill the earth, subdue it, he gave to Adam and Eve in Genesis 3 right after they got kicked out of the garden. So basically, the history of the human race is the development of that mission of stewardship. So Jesus came 2,000 years ago. He's our king, and he's bringing us into maturity and to be able to properly steward the world. And
how do you
look around
that kind of stewardship, because you mentioned maybe something like Nostr, or maybe Elon Musk's view of kind of how technology should develop with Neuralink. How do you sort of map that initial stewardship directive to this very modern day, where a lot of these things, maybe there wasn't even language or concept of what it would, how to interpret it? Like, are there people who collectively try to interpret it together? Or how does that process work?
Yeah, well, the way I like to think about it is in terms of natural revelation, right? So, the Bible is not explicit about the internet or rockets or modern medicine or anything. But one thing that's kind of a Christian biblical concept is the idea of natural revelation, where not only are we given this material substrate to deal with, this material substrate actually reveals something about God. And that was a really common idea in the Middle Ages. So, but what that has to do with technology is that technology is not invented, it's discovered. And so the process of technologization is not one of imposing our view of things on material world. It's a process of being a king and discovering what the purpose that God imbued into the world actually is. Because there's use and there's misuse. I don't think anyone would disagree about that. You can use a rock to build a building, or you can use a rock to knock someone out with. It's fairly obvious which of those is the appropriate use of the rock. And so everything that exists has an appropriate use. People have an appropriate use, language has an appropriate use, and the internet seems like it's something that we kind of came up with out of a whole cloth, but it's not. God invented silicon, and silicon is a semiconductor. That's so cool. It is so cool that there is a rock, right, that has these properties to actually increase the speed of transmission of information to the speed of light. Yeah. We didn't invent that. People found what was there and they put it together, and there you go. So the same applies to social media, right? These walled gardens that we have, Twitter and Facebook and everything, they exist because the affordances are there for them to be made. But it's not really a discovery project. The project of Babylon is imposition of will onto a material substrate. The project of the kingdom of heaven is a seed growing in a garden and turning into a tree, in which the birds of heaven, roost in its branches. So I think the way I approach social media and Nostr is we are discovering the correct way to communicate with each other using this concept of social media. And it's a really, really hard project because it means we have to discard so many assumptions about what social media even is. Most Twitter or most Nostr clients out there are essentially a ripoff of Twitter, and that includes Coracle. You've got the like button, and Jack has said a lot of times, like, I don't like the like button, we should get rid of it. But it's like, what is social media without a like button? Right. But a like button comes from the paradigm of sort of encouraging engagement. And we want engagement because we want people to spend more time so they can see more ads and provide more data to us that we can monetize. And that's essentially like a predatory use of social media. It's a misuse of human beings and of speech and of attention and time. All things, all these primitives that God has given us to use correctly. And so the process of stewardship is figuring out, well, what should I be doing when I'm on the internet browsing?
Oops, I think I may have lost the audio for a second. Are you still there?
Yep, still here.
Okay, I heard all the primitives that God has given us to use correctly, and then it kind of cut.
Yeah, so what should we be doing when we're on our computers on social media? Like, what does that even mean? We have so many assumptions about what it means. And, one concern that people often share is, well, what about social media addiction? What about young girls who, have like body image problems because of Instagram? It's like, well, none of that was intended to be part of social media. That's what we've done as we misuse social media for profit. So
do you think about this like on a day-to-day basis at like the feature level, that there's, like you mentioned, a like as a feature that has ways to be misused, and I would generally agree with those not being kind of the types of things we would hope for. But do you think that like a like button is inherently a misuse, or could it be the algorithms behind it and all of the other kind of ad serving and all the other kind of assumptions that are baked into it that are the misuse? Maybe just as a communication transmission of human experience at the speed of light is actually kind of an okay use of a like button. Like, how do you sort of weigh the how do you value or evaluate at the feature level something's kind of fitness for good use?
I lost you for a second there. That's all right. I think I got the whole thing. But yeah, so like I would like to do more thinking about all these individual features. Right now, there's so much work just to build Nostr in the first place with kind of the key, the cryptographic side of things and the relay side of things that's enough for my poor brain to handle. But yeah, like so for likes, right? I think it was C.S. Lewis that said that the devil never tells a lie right out. He always mixes it with a seed of truth. And so the most effective inventions and impositions of the will of man on creation are based on some amount of truth. So a like is, it's an imitation of a facial expression. If you say something that I like, I smile. And that is something that we're like biologically programmed to actually want. Like, you want me to smile at you. That makes you feel good. And so you have this like dialectic of affection going on. And that can go in a lot of different directions. It can go towards productivity. It can go towards love. But a like is a way of expressing that. And a like is a lot less satisfying than a smile. A smile gives you a much more complete picture of and nuanced picture of what that reaction actually is. Whereas a like, you see that your notification badge and you see that someone liked something you said, and that gives you a little endorphin rush. But so it's kind of like when you're driving a car through the fog, or just driving a car in general. Our bodies were not meant to process information at those speeds. if you drive a lot, you're constantly bombarding your senses with a whole host of stream of information, and that produces a lot of stress in your body. And so it's unhealthy. It has metabolic repercussions, actually, just driving a lot, not just from sitting down, but from actually processing all that data. And so I think social media is the same thing. You have this stripped down version of social interaction that is imitative of the real thing, but ultimately unhealthy. And so that's like kind of a default that gives you a default position of social media is bad, right? Where it's lesser than the real thing. But you can apply that to any technology, like the book. I think at this point everyone agrees like books are good, they're useful. But books are less than having a real conversation with someone. Right. So are we going to discard books because they're an imitation of something that's more complete? No, I don't think so. There are things you can do with books. You can, asynchronous work, basically. You can also articulate yourself by putting your thoughts into a book in a more complete and digestible way. You can transmit that information to more people. So I think social media has similar use cases, but I honestly don't really know how to think about it because, our default view of social media is just so out of whack.
Yeah. Well, I think our defaults are shaped by like a single set of experiences we've had or a very limited set of experiences that have all kind of been convergent in their design. Like you mention a like, and you can't mention a like without mentioning the notification that goes off. And that's not a property of the universe. That's just like a choice that all of the app designers have chosen to do because it's effective for serving more ads, right? But maybe likes don't have to trigger notification bells, or maybe it can be optional, and maybe there's all kinds of different design spaces that could work around the medium that just haven't been explored because there've been a handful of companies that have done the exploration.
Yeah, definitely. I think design is a big part of Nostr development, and there's Carnage Carnage and Danielle are the two designers I know of. Also maybe Daniel. I don't know how much work he's done in the space, but you can actually see most Nostr apps look like something that Carnage designed. His like visual imprint is there.
Aesthetic. Yeah.
But yeah, I would really like to see more of that really original design work being done for likes. What it would look like to get rid of them. But also for like relays and key management and onboarding and stuff like that. It's kind of hard. Like it seems like an inherent limitation with the medium. I've been writing web software for 10 years, and it's weird to me that we're still stuck with just boxes, right? A button is a box inside of a card, which is a box, which is inside a screen, which is a box. And there's something about the geometry of squares that's just really comfortable to people. If you lived inside of a geodesic dome, there would be all this wasted space, both above you and around the edges of the room. And it would not be as comfortable as a square house. But like, what is less human than a square, in terms of, we're not square. Our eyes aren't square. Our field of vision isn't square.
Oops, I think I'm dropping your audio a little bit. Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I think you're back. Yeah.
Yeah,
you were saying, what is less human?
Yeah, what's less human than a square? None of our faculties are square shaped. Our field of vision is not a square. Right. We've got all these weird things like your fovea, where it's this little blind spot that your mind papers over. And yet people like squares. We like to live in squares. We like to read from books that are square. We like our phones to be square or rectangular. We like our computers to be square. We like, I don't know. I'm just totally off on a tangent now, but I find it really interesting.
Yeah.
That there's, because like the ideal is like Jarvis and Iron Man's suit, where everything is out in the air and tangible. And I kind of think that that's too much information for people. And a square is actually like the best possible representational form for information.
I guess squares are like interchangeable, or like right angles allow for a lot of interchangeability that different kind of spherical shapes don't necessarily have because they have like different curvature and stuff. I think about like walking around a geodesic dome home, and I'm not sure like what would my bed or dressers or where would my desk fit in such a space.
Yeah, but they're not hexagonal, and hexagons and triangles are even better in that sense. But we, we have this like 2-axis sort of view of the world. I wonder if, we had, what are the eyes called that like dragonflies have? They've all the segments in their eyes.
Oh yeah.
I wonder if we would have a hexagonal grid system if we had those kind of eyes, right?
Right.
Where there's, and if we flew, I guess, right? Because when you're standing on the ground, you've got a flat surface, and then everything is oriented from there. You don't have 6 directions; you only have 4.
Right.
Yeah, but like maybe dragonflies, if they came up with software, it would be all hexagons.
Yeah. Well, maybe with AI, we can empower them to do so.
Yeah, that will be interesting.
So I noticed you wrote a note, I think just maybe an hour ago or even less, where you were kind of talking about relay selection. I don't know if that was something in particular that a thread you've been thinking about a lot, but it kind of got, something I've been thinking about, and it got me wondering sort of what your positions are on kind of relay selection, relay visibility, and sort of what's the current state of discussion around this, among kind of the development community in Nostr. Do you have kind of a little bit of overview of that problem space?
Yeah, I don't really go around surveying the other clients that are out there all that often. I'll check in on them every so often, but I don't like go through the onboarding workflows. But apparently Coracle, according to the person that I was quoting, is the only client that introduces relays in the onboarding process. And this is something that I worked on a lot in April. I was trying to figure out how to surface relays in a way that was useful and informative. So I added those little colored dots at the bottom of notes in Coracle, and you can click on those to see your feed filtered to just that relay. You can also add relays to your lists so that your lists only pull from a certain selection of relays, or you might be able to, you can set up like a global feed for an individual relay that way. If you go to the relays page on Coracle and click browse relays, I also added a couple weeks ago a feature for leaving reviews and viewing reviews on relays. So you can go there and you can skim through reviews and you can see, okay, what's the average rating for this relay? And then you can add it or not, depending on what people say. Same thing, those pages also have a global feed for each of those relays. And the goal, in my mind, is basically to decommoditize relays. Right now, a relay is, people view it like a Bitcoin node, where it's a certain amount of, people view it like a Bitcoin miner, where it's a certain amount of computational resources sort of thrown in a naive way at a problem in order to support the network. Well, that's sure, that's how Bitcoin miners work, but it's actually not how Bitcoin nodes work. People often say, you should run a node, and then they're quick to elaborate on what that means, but the elaboration is often lost on people. You run a Bitcoin node not to support the network. Running a node doesn't do anything. It only does anything if you actually use your node to validate transactions and make sure that the miners are behaving correctly. And then you can reject certain information based on the state of the blockchain as interpreted by you via your software. So I think relays are a lot more like Bitcoin full nodes than they are like Bitcoin miners. They're running a relay doesn't do anything. It doesn't help the system scale. The system only scales when data locality is aligns with the network of relays that are out there. So having a personal archival node that only you can write to, that's a really valid use of a relay. Running a relay and then subscribing to it and recommending that people do that is almost pointless right now. I think there is an argument to do that ultimately, because only people who see your notes will know about the relay, and so only people in your general network will use the relay, and the relay will propagate through the system, but it will stay fairly local, I think. So that's a valid way to do it. But right now we kind of like stomp of all those differences by replicating content between relays. And that turns relays into just a commodity where, supposedly the more of them, the better. But really, it doesn't make any difference because everyone subscribes to Damus's relay anyway. So Damus is this like kind of centralized system, really, where if Damus deplatforms someone, they're going to disappear from 80% of people's feeds. And that's not entirely true because...
Can we double click? Because I'm a little, I just want to make sure I understand this idea. You're saying if I publish to Damus and Damus deplatforms me, then people can't find me on Damus, but presumably I could, right now I published, 12 relays or so. So people could still pretty easily find me on those other relays, right?
Yeah, they can, but your reach is going to be shortened because everyone uses the Damus relay. And, if you're publishing to 12 relays, like I said, at this point, with everything commoditized, most people are going to have at least one of those relays in their relay sets. And so you do have that censorship resistance. It's just weakened because if we really get to the Pareto principle where 80% of traffic flows through Damus and potentially no other source, you do end up with like a centralized system. And the reason people might not want to add additional relays could be for bandwidth reasons. It could be because a client is making technical decisions for people and just pointing everything to Damus because that's where all the information is. So, those kind of attacks are a lot weaker because of the architecture of Nostr, but they're still feasible, especially if one of these top relays becomes big enough to get like attention from the government, where they have to comply with DMCA takedown orders and stuff like that. So that's the situation.
Is that sort
we
of
want to
happening
avoid
today in reality? That's like is Damus actually kind of 80% of all publishing events or something like that?
I think so. I think it's pretty close to Pareto distribution already. You've got Damus. I think Well Order might be another big one. I think Nostr.band has some stats on that. Let me see.
Yeah, we can pull up. They have some of the top ones. I thought Snort.social was a big one too, if I recall. Let me see if I can pull up.
Yeah, we've got users per relay at the bottom of stats.nostr.band. Damus has almost 400,000 users. Eden.nostr.land has 350,000. Nos.lol has 350,000. And then, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Number 10 is nostr.oxter.dev, and they have about 50,000. And then you've got a long tail, of course.
Right.
A very long tail, because this chart only shows about 25.
Right.
Same thing with the events per relay.
Do you think that gets more concentrated over time, or do you think it might get more kind of, unconcentrated? Or
it depends on what we do. I think the current approach is not going to work because it's expensive to run a big relay. And so it either has to be monetized like Nostr.land does, which is great. I think that's a solid thing to do. It aligns incentives. Or people are going to be donating a lot of money to run big relays, or they're going to shut down their relays. And I don't think Damus is going to shut down. I think having a relay is a really strategic asset for them. I personally don't think clients should run relays. I don't run a relay. And I've heard other people say the same thing because clients and relays coupling sort of creates it just gives you more control and more responsibility over the network. So there's a bunch of things that we can do to prevent this sort of centralization of relays. I don't know how often people use Blaster anymore, but not doing that would be helpful. And of course, not doing that Blaster? Will. So Blaster is it's a piece of software that listens to events, and I'm not exactly sure how it works, but it listens to events on some or all relays and then republishes those events to all the other relays. It's basically a very commoditizing force. And in the short term, it makes sense because it allows you to get the events you want from small relays and stay connected to small relays. So in the short term, it might actually have like a positive effect. If you turned off Blaster, more people would subscribe to Damus because they are now getting an incomplete picture of the network. So, in my mind, that's kind of a good thing, but I look at it as a developer where if I experience pain, I will be incentivized to fix it. But for end users, Blaster is probably actually like a good thing right now for adoption. But that means that developers have to
commoditization, the commoditization of relays kind of suggests that, I think that's kind of like why the whole thing works, right? Is that when you have a front end and a data store coupled, where the front end is dependent on the data store and the data store is dependent on the front end, you are subject to the decisions of the people who run that. Whereas because the relays are all in desperate competition with each other, to sort of serve and host the messages, the best and the most complete list and whatever, it actually puts them in competition, which is what makes the censorship resistance kind of work, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it. And I hadn't really thought in these terms before about competition. But what is incentivizing relays to compete? What's the payoff? Right now it's supporting the network, but the payoff ultimately is going to be making money. So you're going to do it by charging for access, or you're going to do it by doing potentially less principled things like injecting ads into your responses. And then you also
relays can't meaningfully they can't really force ads, right? Because any client could recognize what the ads are and just sort of strip them out, right?
Yeah, and end user clients can.
Relays would have to.
You can refilter. Most people don't do that right now. Kieran actually created a relay that was sending spurious events to kind of get developers to fix that problem.
Just to troll people.
Yeah, which is pretty good actually. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But yeah, But
I think you're right to say that relays would have to get paid eventually, but I would sort of characterize the ecosystem as so early that people don't really know how it's going to work, but that it seems reasonable that some amount of value that flows through these systems would end up in the hands of the relay operators. I assume that's why people would be, excited to maybe make the investment today to be able to, participate in some of the long-term value capture there.
Yeah, and I totally support that. Relay operators should definitely be paid, or at least the relays should give the operators enough utility that is worth their time. Otherwise, we're not going to have any relays. But it's a lot easier to run a relay on a $5 VPS than it is to scale a relay and compete. So when you're competing, you create a really restrictive subset of relays that are able to compete based on competition, and you leave everyone else kind of out in the cold. And I guess you could have both things coexisting, where you have personal archival nodes alongside large networks or large kind of repositories of events. But I think people underestimate the scaling problems associated with centralized relays. Our volume is so low right now. I have a good friend who clued me into this kind of stuff. He used to work at Twitter, and he was telling me, I think we talked about this last time actually, just about all the caching strategies that Twitter has to do. Their infrastructure is just really, really, really sophisticated. And so forcing every relay to do that kind of operational, take on that operational complexity, becomes really expensive. And and you need a really robust business model. And I think some people will do that.
Yeah, could there be alternatives I think about the way blogging, the evolution of blogging over the last, call it 25 years or so. And, initially you needed to rent some server space from some host, right? Or even a shared host, and you'd pay $5 or $10 a month. And then you'd install some blogging software, and then you could actually host a blog. And that was a unique thing that mostly was only nerds and tech people would do. And now you can sort of just show up anywhere, Substack or WordPress or whatever, and kind of launch a blog basically for free. And if you want, you can start to pay to upgrade to get better experience. So they use the free experience as lead gen for more sophisticated services that would get, you could get paid for. And Substack, for example, is totally free for the publisher to use. But if they choose to make money on their Substack, then Substack gets a share of that. So to me, it feels like we're in kind of like 1998 blogging, where like anybody who's running these things is actually paying for it and installing it and doing some maintenance. But if you fast forward, I mean, I don't think it'll take 25 years, but like if you fast forward 25 years, like none of those problems are real problems today. It's like there's a whole set of offerings at different kind of configurability and price point trade-offs that different people want. And my guess is if we can get Nostr into the hands of more people and more people find it useful, then those kinds of trade-offs of configurability and control and cost would kind of emerge naturally as kind of a market phenomenon.
Yeah, so I guess the problem I see is if you have like one-click relays where you just go to a hosted interface and you click on a button and now you have a relay that you can run for free, and let's just say it's a personal archival relay because that's kind of the easiest use case for an end user to care about and understand. Like that's fine. There's the issue of it's hosted on a server, so it is a little bit more centralized in that sense. But I guess what incentive do people have to use those relays rather than use the fast central well maintained one? If you
could there be an architecture like all the complex caching that you're talking about? Could that be some sort of a middleware layer or some other layer that's not well defined in today's ecosystem, but that can know where all the personal relays are, pull it, do all the caching, and itself be a choice? Maybe it's like a caching relay that people could choose to avoid if it's not doing a good job or if it's sort of censoring people, or they could use a different one that doesn't censor those people. But maybe like a new layer could emerge that would help solve some of these problems.
Yeah, and I've thought about that, and you can have those layers either in front of or behind the relays. And so if like you have a search service is kind of a special purpose caching service, and obviously it has to have an index of all the data. And so if you want to search for something, you go there, and they need to maintain a copy of the data so that they can serve results. And then but the data that they serve may have omissions. And so how do you avoid a malicious search server that omits things? You can make end users or clients choose a different search service, but that has like the problem of vendor lock-in, where most people will not bother if it's up to the end user. Clients may care, but most likely you're going to have a big client running their own search service and then imposing their own choices. And so if you can set up those caching and search and like extension services to sit behind the relays, where instead of like you bake it into the protocol to where instead of saying, well, I have this technical problem that I need to solve, so I'm going to go to the solution and then talk to the relays, you can go to the relays that you want to connect to. And since you're already kind of putting your trust in those relays to disagree enough for you to know what data is missing, then you can ask them, like, what search services do you recommend? And then if like 3 out of 5 relays say, well, we know that this search service is trustworthy and they index our data because we pay for that, we pay for them too, then the client hops to that search service. Or, potentially relays could proxy those search requests themselves. So a relay doesn't have to be like a $5 VPS, could just give the client a redirect or just proxy the search through the server. And so you create these relays with all of that additional functionality, really sophisticated, heavy functionality, and so you commoditize the extension functionality, but not the relays. So you go to a particular relay because you care about the person who posts to it, but then that person delegates all of the computational resource to a service provider. And then you have a different kind of vendor lock-in. You have vendor lock-in for not for the end user, but for the operator of the relay. And the operator of the relay is the publisher. And so they care a lot more about the vendors supporting them. So they're going to be more motivated to switch between those extension services. So that's kind of like, that's how I hope that we can make things work out. But it kind of relies on developers actually investing time in solving those problems and being principled. And yeah, like your point about it being okay for there to be large relays is a really interesting one, because as long as anyone can create an archival relay and their followers can directly point their clients to it, that provides a certain level of censorship resistance. And I guess, so like, let's just suppose that Alex Jones, got deplatformed from the 10 big relays that serve, 300 million people. Let's just go with Twitter's numbers.
Sure.
So you can, if you want to hear about Alex Jones's ideas, you can point your relay to, or point your client at his relay. And you can also follow relay recommendations from people who repost his content,
Yeah.
Assuming that your client implements the gossip model. I suppose the main weakness is that he wouldn't have as much reach because of the censorship of the big relays, right? But yeah, I'm not sure.
Why
I'm
would
not
he
sure
not
how big
have
of a
as much
problem that
reach?
is.
Because I guess the thing you just described to me sounds like it would help maintain the same reach if people are reposting things and there's some sort of. I'm not an expert on the gossip model or any kind of how relay discovery works today or should work in the future, but it would seem like the using a major relay may be a convenience or an easy default, but I think the structure of the decoupling of these systems enables, whether it's true today or not, but it enables that Alex Jones use case for him to publish on a separate server and people to easily find that and just mix that content into whatever else they're pulling from. So to me, that it kind of speaks to the magic of Nostr. Like that's, not all the problems are solved probably to keep that reach, but I don't think that reach has to be limited. We probably don't have all the details worked out for how to ensure that reach is not curtailed at all. But like, I don't know, like what is the current state? Like, do we have much thinking on kind of how relay discovery, or maybe it's in this gossip stuff, but like, how should relays be found and discovered? And like, when somebody gets taken down somewhere, how do people learn about the fact that they pop up somewhere else?
Yeah, well, I think that's basically right. That the gossip model handles the deplatforming of people by handling the deplatforming of relays that aren't as widely used. And the way the gossip model works is basically when you repost something, you mention the user, or like the person or the event ID, and then you include a relay in the signed event. That's a hint. So if that relay goes offline, the hint is worthless, and you're stuck with checking your centralized services again. But like, for the most part, that's not going to be super common, except for really old information. And so when you get an event, a repost or something, you can look at the hint and say, okay, well, I can follow that to this marginal relay. And so I think that's a really good way to allow sort of a seamless navigation of a client across everything. Actually, discovering relays is probably more of the problem, because like so the couple different things going on here. So, if Alex Jones is deplatformed from the big relays, and the big relays are the ones that everyone goes to for search. So right now, that's basically how it works: is is like Nostr.band is the only relay. There's one other one that supports search, so everyone searches through them. And so, in terms of content discovery, the content addressing part works because you can go to the relay that the hint pointed to and you're good. But content discovery means that, is a lot more centralized. So in order to find Jones's relay and search his content, you'd have to already know about his relay, right? And if that relay isn't, if events with hints towards that relay are removed from search results, or search results are in a different format, then you don't have that content discovery mechanism anymore. Yeah, I'm not sure if that quite gets at the question. Could you repeat the question?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm just trying to, given the decoupling of all of the pieces in Nostr, it seems to me like we should be able to help reassemble where content gets published, even if we don't necessarily have those tools or the protocol doesn't quite support it today in a perfect way. So I guess I'm just trying to understand better. I think you proposed I think a little bit of a gloomy scenario where something where a certain relay gets maybe 80% or more, or the handful of relays get a lot of the attention and sort of publishing and consumption. And we've been talking about this Alex Jones case. And so if Alex Jones were to get deplatformed from the let's say the 5 or 6 relays that basically everybody's using, is there a mechanism where he could go off isolated, build his own personal relay, and somehow broadcast out, or somehow be discovered, or somehow not lose most of the audience that he already has? And I don't know if we have all of the tools to do that. I would assume we probably don't, because it's very early in the development of solving these problems. But I would guess that because it probably can be possible to build such a thing, it puts all relays on notice that they better not censor things, or go ahead and censor it if you want, but it's obviously going to get carried by these 5 or 6 other ones. How do you get all the centralized relays to coordinate and agree what the policy should be, who should be taken down? I think it's unlikely that they'll all see it the same way. And so just by having even 5 or 6 big players, I think you're mostly safe from that. But I don't know exactly if it's the way gossip works or something else, but how do you actually help a brand new relay that nobody knows about, that just got birthed, today, but that carries some important messages that a lot of people want to hear? How do you sort of broadcast that to the network, or help people understand that can or should be pulled from? And I don't know, I'm talking very abstract and theoretical. I don't know if to what extent these things do work today, or to what extent gossip is widely supported, or sort of the details of how that works. But maybe, I don't know if any of that sort of refreshes some of the context of what I'm still a little bit foggy about.
Yeah, so I think if you're big already and then you get deplatformed, Nostr can help you keep your audience, because you have a well-known relay, let's hope, that people can connect with. And so, yeah, that's less of a problem. Maybe it's more of an issue of smaller people who get deplatformed, who are not as well known and are still in the sort of discovery phase of their content. Being deplatformed would mean that the only mechanism for discovering that would be relay hints, which could be purged from the centralized players. And if there's 5 big relays, they might not agree as strictly on what should be deplatformed, but a lot of the impetus for removal is I basically support censorship of inappropriate content. YouTube has a platform and they don't want violence and porn and stuff on their site, and that's completely fine for them to say this is the kind of content we want to serve, and this is the kind that we don't want to serve. When it becomes a problem when they're being told by the government or by some other cultural apparatus to censor valuable information, and that is the kind of censorship that is going to happen across the board. So if you're 5, and that's where you have jurisdictional arbitrage, I guess, where if you have your 5 big relays, but one of them is based in Russia or something, they're going to be concerned about removing different things. But of course, if it's based in Russia, then maybe you won't have access to it if you're in the United States. So it's effectively not a relay in that situation. And so the size of relays, the size and number of relays is important, because 1,000 small relays can't be effectively policed, but 5 big relays could be. So if you do, because it's a legal process basically to do those takedowns. And so with a few big relays, but your question was more about how can new publishers get their content discovered, assuming a functioning network, right, without censorship. And I think that's really interesting. I would say, so yeah, one idea that I've had that I really like is basically aligning relays with more narrowly with a particular form of content. So rather than a relay being, we serve the entire network. A relay might say, we are this magazine, and we publish stuff that's relevant to Bitcoin. And we already have that. We have like Bitcoin only relays, and just extending that to every different topic and community. Like we're the English only relay, or we are the relay that, republishes all of the United States government's announcements. And then you have this kind of narrow band of information that you're interested in. And so for these, and that can actually be, that can support an advertising model, right? So these relays have a following because of the topic that they're publishing. And so if a new publisher comes online and wants to get their stuff discovered, they go to the relay where their readers are. So, I start a Bitcoin podcast and I want to be discovered. So I go talk to the Bitcoin only relay that everyone, like it's one of the big ones for the size of the community. It's not so big that it's has a meaningful level of censorship across a lot of channels. It's just a big channel. And I ask them, hey, if I give you $100 a month, will you publish my notes? And they add my pub key to their whitelist, and then there you go. And then of course my notes can have a hint to my own relay, and that strengthens my connection to the network in terms of serving. And that's a really interesting idea, because I haven't thought about this in terms of crafting hints, right? Coracle tries to do the best hints possible with the information that we're given. But as a publisher, you might really have a strong opinion about what relay you want to publish as your hint, rather than just saying, choose any relay that I publish to as my hint. In Coracle, that's probably going to result in a whole lot of hints towards Damus, just because most people are connected to Damus, and fewer hints to the less well-known ones. So as a user, you should probably be able to say, what relay do you prefer to hint when you're publishing? You can publish to a lot of different relays, but you want to point people to your specific node. I think that would be really productive, using the wider network as a bootstrap to increase the reputation of your slice of it. Yeah.
So you're kind of building your really audience around or kind of building your audience or relationships around your kind of private node, say, and sort of build up some reputation there.
Yeah. So it would be kind of domain reputation. And of course, that has problems connected with it too. Jameson Lopp has been talking a lot about why email failed the way it did. And that's really the same way I see the risk to Nostr is a lot of small, reasonable decisions piling up until people can't run their own relay, essentially.
Right.
So, and I don't really know how you solve that other than proof of work. I used to be kind of against proof of work for Nostr, but I see the value now. And
is that proof of work in some sort of publishing mechanism, or in kind of key generation, or where would proof of work live?
Yeah. So when you create a event ID, the ID is random. So you just you generate a bunch of random IDs until you have a bunch of zeros at the front of it. And then that proves that you put in a certain amount of work to publish this event. And that's a good weapon against spam. So the downfall of email was not censorship and reputation in that sense. It was reputation because an unknown domain is most likely to be a spammer. So if you have that mechanism to kind of bypass the spam problem, then relay reputation might be less of a sticky issue. But yeah, I mean, I'm way out over my skis at this point. I don't know the answers to these questions.
Right. How do you think about? I know that you. I think I saw some screenshots you shared around how the onboarding process, or one of the core screens within Coracle, works for finding relays. And so maybe I could characterize you as a proponent of more surfacing of relays, or more kind of user awareness or selection. How do you have a mental model or a simple way to communicate to a new user who doesn't really understand this? They're maybe coming from a different social media experience and they're kind of coming to this. How would you describe what the purpose of selecting a relay is?
Yeah, unfortunately, not yet. A relay is like the best metaphor I have so far is it's a server, but that's something that normal people are not going to understand or appreciate. So relay decommoditization has to happen before you can come up with those metaphors and explanations. In my putative future world, a magazine is the best metaphor I have so far. So, and it's, like kind of in the sense of a zine, it's kind of a punk publisher, where one person just gets to say who they publish to or who they republish, and you follow the zines that you are interested in. And the difference being that it's not content that you're shooting for, it's like meta content. So a relay is kind of it's a curation. So I tried out Yakihon recently, and it's this Chinese Nostr client, and it's pretty good. They have curation. So you basically, it's like lists of content. It's kind of like Pinster actually too, but it's really well presented. And I think that's kind of the way forward for relays, because relays are they're not currently clustered around content or communities, but that's how they could decommoditize. Because if relays are commoditized, there is no reason to choose any relay over another except for reliability and speed and completeness of data. So the best recommendation for a newcomer right now is choose the default relays, and that'll connect you to the whole network. But if there is going to be a recommendation, it has to be based on content.
Right. Do you find the idea of having kind of a relay coupled with something algorithmic, do you find that like okay and consistent with your hope for the future, or do you find algorithmic stuff coupled into relays as kind of like a bad pattern that we should be trying to avoid?
I think that's great. It's much, much better than having the algorithm built into the client, because with the client, you can open source the relay. Open source the algorithm a lot more easily. But that's not really that useful to most people. You can have some information that's out there about, well, here's how the client does it, and here's the different algorithms, and you can have a lot of transparency, but it's kind of, if your client does a really good job with your algorithm, then that is a centralizing force where people are going to want to use that client because it has good algorithms. Can also be a decentralizing force because the client's just like, I serve you my followers and that's what I serve your followers and that's what you want. But with relays, you have a lot more user choice and a lot lower user friction. So if you couple an algorithm and a client really closely, you have to use that client to get that algorithm. It becomes a feature of the client, right? And maybe you don't like everything about the client, but you're stuck on the client because they have this algorithm, or you go there to use their algorithm. But if you have algorithms on relays, you can relays have they're accountable because you can leave a review on the relay and say this algorithm is not actually what it advertises to be, and they're swappable. You can use that relay from any different client, and they're composable. So you can create a list of relays for a given purpose, and then subscribe to that entire list. And now you get to mix and match a bunch of different relay algorithms. So like ultimately you might have really, really granular relay algorithms that are like, this relay only serves posts from these two pub keys that mention this topic. And then you just add that to your relay set, and there you go. Like you have a really focused content stream, and then you add that to a bunch of other relays. So I think it's perfect, and that's a really good example of decommoditization of relays, because that's content focused, and it's not because people publish to those particular relays. It's because those relays surface that content. So that's
they
really
do a better
lot
job
like
of
that.
Serving people's kind of needs.
Yeah. So that's like that zine example that I was mentioning. I've seen people try to do Reddit alternatives on Nostr, and so far,
I was gonna ask what's the state of that, because when you talk about zines, to me that feels like a subreddit, and it feels like this is something that we have evidence now of bad behavior from centralized platforms that probably is bad enough behavior that would, people would actually be looking, en masse for an alternative. Are there really good kind of subreddit like Nostr clients out there today, or what's the sort of state of that world?
I wish I could remember the name of the clients. I might have one written down.
Because to me, this feels like one of these, one of these cases. Like, I don't know that a lot of people experience direct censorship on Twitter. And so I think it's easy for people to say, oh, cool, like Twitter clones, those are nice. We like them. They're little water coolers for us to hang around on Nostr because we're sort of already excited about the, underlying ideas. But, to really find new audiences that don't really care so much about, maybe all the technology, but they just want to get something done, feels like the subreddit censorship use case is a great one because you get a whole group of people who are experiencing the same problem at the same time. And if you get just one group of them to switch and they all have a good experience, probably word gets out and others would find this compelling too. So I wonder if the subreddit is actually, yep.
Yeah, that's really interesting because the network effect is not as strong for Reddit because it's not the entire network that you care about. It's just the one thing where there's like 12 active members. And so, yeah, a lot lower barrier to switching. The Reddit-like client, so Zapidit is one.
How do you spell that?
Zappdit.
DDIT. So Zapdit.
They're one, and there's another one that I saw. I can't remember what it is, but they're mostly organized around like a topic idea that's built into the protocol. Like, so Zapdit is just like a topic browser. And then there's one that's actually built on Coracle, but I can't remember what it's called. I can find it.
A subreddit-like experience built on top of Coracle?
Yeah. It's actually really gratifying to see someone build on top of my work.
Yeah, that's cool.
I've almost got it here. Agora Social .app is that one. And it looks like Coracle, but it's focused on topics. So you've got two Reddit-like interfaces, and both of them use topics as sort of the primitive for subreddits. And I don't think that's where it's going to stop. So Amethyst recently introduced communities, which I don't think it has moderation yet, but moderation's kind of on the table. That's NIP 172 on the GitHub. So like topics aren't really subreddits. They're just topics. They're not.
Right.
It's not a group of people.
I'm looking at Agora. It looks kind of like hashtag oriented.
Yeah. It's not a group of people. It's content based on kind of self-identifying what your content is actually about. So I don't think that's a really complete replacement for Reddit. But it does have the benefit of having that censorship resistance. So if you built a Reddit model based on relays where you have like a moderated relay where people post, now you've basically got your Mastodon situation again. You don't really have a home server where your profile is stored, so at least there's that. But if you have a topical relay, then they have complete control over the topic. And if you want moderation, that's a good thing. But, if maybe you want different moderation than someone else. So it'd be really interesting to have a subreddit where you have two different owners, two different sets of owners, and they moderate using different heuristics. And you want to join that subreddit, but you want to subscribe to moderator B rather than moderator A. You can still interact with the people in subreddit, subreddit A, based on the intersection of the moderation.
Right.
And so, oh man, that's really, really interesting. Maybe that's the right way to do it.
Yeah,
maybe that's better than having
this. This feels
relays.
Really interesting to me because, well, it could be that the special purpose relay plays a role, but I'm imagining something that's very Nostr native, where a client lets you publish a note, but maybe it has maybe there's a new kind or some sort of metadata that says this belongs to a certain place, like a certain community, a certain magazine, a certain subreddit. And so I can publish it even if the people who originally set that up don't agree with what I'm saying, but I can like put it into the pool of things that people might pull from when deciding. And they might run the primary relay that serves up all of the notes that are tied to this. They might choose their own algorithm. They might have their own moderation scheme. But because all of the notes are written by any individuals who want to tag it as part of that thing, it's kind of like submission versus front page, right? Like anybody who wants can kind of submit to a subreddit, but only a certain set of things makes it to the front page. It feels like those could be kind of decoupled nicely with the Nostr native, like publish things to a relay. Maybe there's like one core relay operator who operates a thing, does moderation, does algorithms, but other people could pick up those same nodes and run very different algorithms on that, very different moderation approaches on that. So you kind of get sort of the best of both worlds, but it's like a very Nostr native concept. It's not really like, it's not like a hashtag like we're seeing in Agora, and it's not like a fully centralized thing. It's maybe something that begins a little centralized but could expand, because it, like, if it architecturally allows for anybody to submit and tag things as such.
Yeah, I really like that. Anyone can submit and anyone can become a moderator. If all you have to do to become a moderator is publish a moderation opinion, and there you go. And you could potentially have multiple moderation subgroups that have different approaches. So you might have a whitelist moderator and you might have a blacklist moderator. Your whitelist moderator would say, I'm going to say that these things are part of my, curation, really, at that point. You have the complete authority over what is in your subreddit. But then a blacklist moderator would be like, everything is visible by default if I don't say anything, but then I'm going to remove things from my curation. The first one would scale better than the second one, but both would totally be usable. And the idea of having an individual relay support those moderation decisions is interesting too, because the relay would not be a relay for the subreddit. It would be a relay for the moderator. Really, the subreddit doesn't exist. Well, it does. Yeah. So the subreddit is basically, instead of a relay that you post your notes to, it would be some note in the system that you reference when publishing a note. I think that's kind of how NIP 172 is progressing. You've changed my mind. I was originally not super happy with that kind of moderated communities approach, but you've convinced me. I think that is actually really good.
Yeah, I find it compelling that. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of composition. So the better primitives we have, the more we can do with them. And this seems like a really good primitive.
Yeah. I also like the fact that we have evidence of people launching their own subreddit-like things outside of Reddit that can be successful on their own. So like, I think Hacker News is one example. Stacker News is another example. I've actually chatted briefly with Kian about this. He runs Stacker News, which is a fully centralized service, but he's also been building things in, he built it's Booger and Orbit, which are, Nostr tools that he's using to sort of explore the space. But it feels like something like that. We already have evidence that if you find just a focused community that cares about it, you can get enough people together that thing works. I think it's just like, it's like a moment in time right now where I think people would be running toward this instead of just, running away from, Twitter. Maybe they're running away from Reddit, but there's enough of them at a, with a deep enough need here that's obvious to, dozens of people at the same time. And it fits this magazine thing. I also know last time we talked, which was several months ago, but you had talked about kind of these sort of like the Facebook groups modality and some of your church group and how they might fit. I wonder, would something like a subreddit for kind of as a replacement for a Facebook group or kind of an alternative way to consume information that might otherwise flow through a Facebook group, does that feel like it's mission aligned and consistent with what maybe the group that you've been thinking about would need, or is it more like you want to get this working with more of a tech audience first and maybe graduate to kind of other more non-tech themes later?
Yeah, the tricky thing about that is privacy, I think. So having an open subreddit system like we're talking about allows for a whole bunch of different opinions about the content and subscribing to those opinions. It's almost like the subreddit idea is the same as decentralized moderation of anything. Whereas with a community, you have if you want to post to a community and not have the rest of the network see it, you need a whole different, it might be an entirely different approach. You know, either you use encryption and you're throwing a bunch of encrypted notes onto relays, and they aren't really going to appreciate that because they don't know if it's spam or not. Especially if you have like wrappers that obfuscate who actually even posted it in the first place. It's just going to look like trash. Or you have a couple of relays that you publish in plain text to that then don't share that information with anyone else. As far as like wanting to build that is still where I'm focused. There's just so much other stuff to do first, but I think about that use case all the time. I just need someone to pilot it with. So if you're out there, anyone, and you have a private community, whether it's a church or a business or like an interest group or whatever it might be, let me know. Reach out to me on Nostr and I will build it for you. But one interesting idea that I came across in conversations with Eric Aronesty on GitHub is the idea of combining the cryptography and the relay hosting sort of capabilities. So for censorship resistance, you would use a shared private key that you would encrypt everything with, and then you would send that to the wider network, but then you would read events from a particular relay or even like another relay that you stand up that then copy those events and then unwrap them so the relay has access to the private key so that it can then index and add search to your notes. And then so you ask it for a query and then it spits out all the encrypted notes and you have the private key for the group as well. And so you unwrap those notes and then you can see them. And what that does is it allows you to publish to the wider network without sharing any secret data, and it fixes the search problem. Because when you start wrapping notes and encrypting the content, you end up with the problem of there's no metadata on them. So you know, if you have a really large group with 10,000 members or something, you're going to end up with 1 million events that the only way to search them is to download all of them and then run your search across them in memory, which is not feasible for any client, really. So having a relay do that heavy lifting for you would be a good out. So you could use the cryptographic approach and then unlock it with a privileged relay, which would really be
whoever
like
would assemble the group would be choosing a relay to trust with that kind of decryption key. Is that right? Well,
the proposal that we have out right now for this is every member of the group has the private key. And so what that means is they can post to the group with impunity, and they can decrypt anything posted to the group. The problem with that obviously is the classic key rotation problems. You know, if you share the key publicly, the entire group is compromised and you can read everything that was ever posted to the group. So you know, one way to get around that is to have a moderator with a separate key, and then those moderators share that key with that privileged relay. And so nothing is in the group unless it was published with the moderation key. So the moderator listens to events published to the group by members, unwraps those, rewraps them with the moderation key, and then serves those from the relays. The original events are either discarded or just kind of like, well, hopefully they would be discarded. Hopefully you would publish them to the privileged relay so they can be destroyed. And then you reduce the attack surface area for the key leakage to not 10,000 members, but 3 moderators. And then those moderators get to, as a side effect, get to actually moderate what's in the group and what isn't. But it would help with some of the security aspects of it. So I think that's a pretty promising design for the private groups stuff.
Yeah, I wonder actually, because a few things here. Last time we talked, I think, was a day or two before I first noticed Simplex out, and I wonder, like, have you studied that, and does that look like a compelling, solution or partial solution to some of these problems?
Not at all. I've left that to other people. Haven't had that much time the last couple months, and the buzz around it has died down a little bit. I've not used it or been sent a message through it as far as I know. So
Okay.
yeah.
I played around with it, and it's cool and a little clunky. It didn't quite do exactly what I'd hoped, but I can see. I mean, you can sort of squint and see that the experience could be improved. It doesn't take a lot. It's already kind of in pretty good shape. But I wonder if there are some of the technical details with how they do their queuing, and the sort of message queues that people pull off of, I think are sort of equivalent to a relay from Nostr, or at least sort of analogous in some way. So I'm interested if there's stuff in private groups, if that kind of stuff could be part of a solution. But the other thing I was thinking about is you're sort of making a call to find groups of people who might find this valuable, and I think it's like a slightly different use case, but maybe close enough. Is I think recently I thought I saw that Will was consolidating a bunch of the email lists that are active onto a Google group, and I think it's not fully private, or like you can join it even if you weren't invited. So they may have like a more liberal permissioning, but I wonder if you were to solve it in if you had like a really polished client and experience around kind of these relay kind of moderation and signing hypotheses, if you could actually get a core set of Nostr people, would probably be excited to use that as a core tool. So I don't know if that's a good spot to look, or if it's too high a bar to sort of, have a prototype be good enough to replace kind of what otherwise works in an email case. But that might be one to look at.
Yeah, dog food it. I didn't know about that group. So far, a bunch of like developer Nostr groups pop up and then disappear and just become inactive. So I think the culture of Nostr development is so open that there's just not that much interest in a alternative. Just send your notes to the entire network, and you can talk about it there.
Right. But there still are like telegrams that are topic specific, or email lists and stuff. So it feels like for some reason, I don't know which ones are the most active, or if ones pop up and die down. But there's, even though we have kind of a small enough group that it's tenable within the core protocol, I think people still like launching separate experiences, sort of trying different types of permissioning or visibility or scoping. So there's some sort of some appetite for that.
Yeah, of course. Just got to find the right people and create an experience that's good enough for them to use. I have chat in Coracle, and I haven't touched it since December because honestly, I want the feature to die. I don't want to have to maintain it, but people use it, so I can't kill it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But yeah, like cool. Adding features. You never know exactly which one is going to create an entirely separate product that you have to maintain.
Right.
It's hard to stay focused when there's so many different ideas that you want to try out and execute on.
We should probably wrap. Any last minute ideas that we should have been chatting about that we didn't get to cover yet?
No, I think we covered it. That was a good conversation.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for making the time. And
thank you. Thank you for having me again.
I think there's so much always happening, day by day, week by week. So just talking to people like you who are in the thick of it are really what helped me learn the most and keep kind of shaping and forming my opinions. Then if we can share it with other people, that's great too. Yeah,
it's great to get out of my head too. I've changed my opinions about a couple of different things over the course of this conversation. So
great. And people got to check out your new podcast.
Yeah, do it. Thank God for Nostr.
Tell us again how to find it. We just go into like any podcast client? We can search for Thank God for Nostr and find episode 1.
Yep, it's published on Anchor, so it'll be anywhere. But tgfb.com is the site for them.
Sounds good. All right, man.
Cool.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, David. Have a good one.